protecting the police every single day.
Breaking news, community call to action. Fort Myers police chief spends taxpayer money for personal use. Call Chief Diggs and tell him to pay back our taxpayer money. His cell phone number is 419-360-6372. I received a letter from a government whistleblower, most likely disgruntled Lieutenant J. Rodriguez. The letter claimed that the police chief was misusing his city-issued purchase card for extravagant meals and buying alcoholic beverages. The letter also claimed that the police chief would often drink and drive home. I made a public records request for the police chief's financial transactions. The public records request turned up evidence that backed up the claims in the letter of inappropriate use of public funds. Fort Myers Police Chief Derrick Diggs has been misusing his city purchase card for personal uses. Mr. Diggs has violated not only City Policy Section 13 of the Purchase Card Program but Florida Statute 112.061 per diem and travel expenses for public officers, employees, and authorized persons. The city policy explicitly states that purchase cards cannot be used for any personal use and list a number of items that are prohibited, such as vehicle repairs, travel expenses such as hotels, food, and airline tickets, cash advances, telephone chargers, items available through the office supply contract, any item or service available on a city annual quotes, any additional goods or services specifically restricted by the purchasing department. According to public records of Mr. Diggs' purchase card statements obtained from City Clerk's office by citizen activists, Chief Derrick Diggs has showed reckless disregard for the policies of our city and has spent thousands of dollars on expensive meals for himself and his political friends. Mr. Diggs has purchased personal items for himself that have no apparent law enforcement purpose, such as Sirius satellite radio for one of the 2 city cars the chief has in his possession, membership for himself and others for the NRA. These extravagant meals started within weeks of Mr. Diggs' employment with the city. On September 23, 2016, the chief went to Pincher's and spent $144.21 for a meal. In just 4 months on the job, the chief spent $669.09 on expensive meals, including meals at the Veranda, Joe Crab Shack, Ford's Garage, and the Standard. The chief has spent over $13,000 in 3 years in meals for himself and his dinner guests. He gave $1,000 to the Fort Myers High School Band and has given multiple donations of $1,800 to the Nations Association. These are donations that are normally made by the City Council or by using forfeiture funds from law enforcement. This is an inappropriate use of the purchase card. The chief has gone on a spending spree purchasing boots for himself that cost the taxpayers $155. The records show he has taken the mayor, city manager, and city attorney out for expensive meals as well. Fort Myers City Councilwoman Terrell Watson was notified of this abuse of taxpayer money and took immediate action as a watchdog of the taxpayers' money. She has put on the City Council agenda, for tomorrow at 4:30 p.m., for the council to vote to open up an investigation into the police chief's misuse of government funds.
It was truly a privilege to do this engagement and be retained by the city of Fort Myers to look into the police department. We were brought in by the city with no strictures placed on us. We were given unfettered access to the department and all its members. This report was not to zero in on the good things the police department does, that they do on a daily basis. It was a critical evaluation. It was to look at the bad things. So not only did they ask us to do an evaluation, but they wanted us to zero in on the things that were not working right, or the perception was they were not working right. We were tasked by the city to identify impediments to addressing crime within the city of Fort Myers, and more specifically within the Dunbar community. There was a buyout in 2008, and there's realities of life. and the realities of life as a police department or any municipal agency is funded by public monies. But when that buyout occurred, the city lost a great deal of very experienced officers. And you just don't replace that overnight. And that was a problem. And then when the budgetary problems persist and you cannot replace officers, and the officers continue to operate on a lower level in terms of numbers, their job is harder. So that officer who responds to something on the street where it would have been better to spend more time has to immediately leave that call to go to another call. And so the public then feels they're not getting the proper attention because at that call, maybe they needed that officer longer. And the public's right. But the officer had to move on to another call, and the officer is right. So there are issues when you're not properly staffed. And that's something the city is committed to address. Another one is there is a real thought within the department that preferential treatment permeated the entire organization. In other words, the great majority, if not almost every single person we interviewed, said there was a cliquish system within the department. You either were in or you were out. And many of them really felt that was a problem, as do we. But in any small organization, you're going to have that. One thing that was felt was so many of the supervisors come out of the same group, the narcotics section, and then move their way through. Another issue was the failure to address certain integrity issues. We did, through our interviews, learn that there were some integrity issues within the department. That does occur, and that is something, when it occurs, must be dealt with. The way it was dealt with historically was to not deal with it. That cannot happen. That is something that needs to be addressed one way or the other. Again, the current administration, the chief, is committed to dealing with those issues and dealing with them heads on. There's no other way. You must understand that if you don't deal with them, your department is isolated, which in very many ways has happened from other law enforcement entities in the area. They lack sufficient physical space, and this goes to support staff as well. Crime scene technicians, we run through it in a report. There's a lot of inadequate spacing. And as we mentioned, a lot of this is historical and has been going on for years, and they've been making do. Eventually, to do the job right, you need the proper resources. Our recommendations that we've made in the report, and we've made a number of them, we tiered and made a tiered approach to them. The reason for that is we wanted to put different levels. Tier 1 are recommendations that we believe the city must institute immediately because it affects the safety of the citizens of Fort Myers. So that has to be done right now. An example, the communications division. Historically, that section has been tremendously understaffed. And the fear is from within the police department, and again, much of what we learned comes from the police department. The fear was that someone could get hurt or worse if they don't adequately respond to the 911 calls. And that's something that the city jumped on. So we've got 4 tiers. Tier 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then tier 4, to go to the opposite end of the spectrum, are going to be those things that, such as, can the city afford a new building? Or can the city renovate that building? Or provide other places or locations that might supplement the existing space? Because like anything else, they're running out of space, and that's something that the city is looking into. So that is important and essential, but not as timely as something like responding to 911 calls.
The action steps that are recommended will be acted upon immediately. Some of the things I want to bring out to you. Our number one priority at all times is safety of our citizens. To that end, we have hired 4 new staff members in the communication section to enhance the response time for our officers. We've invested in 142 brand new body cameras that are going to be used by the department that we're starting to deploy this week. Since my appointment, we have already hired 8 new police officers. We have begun a search for a full-time public information officer. Training practices and procedures need to be brought up to date. We have already embarked upon a strategic training and education program to educate our officers and give them the tools they need to do their job. Substations. We have already started looking at several substations before the report was issued, and indeed the report recommended that we do so. We'll have more details about specific location of these substations, but in the report, one were the recommendations that we put a substation in the Dunbar community area, which we will do. Overall, we have improved the safety of our citizens in our neighborhoods, and we will continue to do so.
It's interesting to see how little a difference there is between so many of the police officers' views and people in the community, and how they share a common concern, and yet there's been tensions and there's been problems like anywhere else. And the goal here is to make the department as good as it can be, to let the public know that the department's there to serve them, and try to meld those interests. And that's what the city is committed to doing.
Hey Charlotte County, this is Charlotte County COPWATCH. I am using any video here under fair use if you have criticism, reporting, teaching, etc. And please donate. I do not make money from YouTube, and there are different ways to donate in the video links. Thanks.